glad we have a law that we can take to the Supreme Court and get the Supreme Court to relook at Roe versus Wade.
Here's a man who has not given up his proclamation of terror, and we have to let him out.
Our films tend to be shitty, mostly.
The Justice Department has issued an 18-count indictment against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, saying he worked with Chelsea Manning to unlawfully obtain and publish classified information in breach of the Espionage Act. That could set a dangerous precedent for the government to go after a group known for publishing classified information: journalists. India's nationalist strongman Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, won a second 5-year term in the world's largest election, and his party won an absolute majority in parliament. This time around, Modi focused on securing India from its nuclear neighbor, Pakistan. The World Health Organization launched its first ever plan to take on what it calls the world's biggest hidden health crisis: snake bites. The agency says venomous snakes kill up to 138,000 people a year and disable 400,000, with most victims in Asia and Africa. The WHO wants to cut those numbers in half by 2030 by educating health workers on how to treat bites and improving access to antivenoms. Last year, President Trump gave farmers $12 billion to ride out his trade war with China. But that trade war is still on, and China's still refusing to buy American crops. So today, Trump announced a second, bigger bailout package for farmers valued at $16 billion.
China has openly stated they're going to use the farmer. The reason is because I got the farmers' votes. You look at a map, it's all red, meaning Republican, meaning Trump.
It's been a week since the Alabama governor signed the strictest abortion ban in the country, making abortion illegal flat out unless the mother's life is at risk. No exceptions, even for rape or incest. Republicans have spent that week distancing themselves from the law.
I don't support the Alabama law. I believe that there ought to be exceptions. I'm pro-life, but there ought to be exceptions for rape and incest and where the life of the mother is at risk.
And even President Trump tweeted that he believes in exceptions. But internal talking points obtained exclusively by Vice News' Daniel Neuhauser shows that an influential group of conservatives is pushing the party to double down, saying Republicans need to unite around opposing all abortions, regardless of how the child was conceived. The memo was distributed by the Republican Study Committee, the largest conservative caucus in the House. Most House Republicans are in the group, including Minority Whip Steve Scalise, Republican Conference Chairwoman Liz Cheney, and Vice Chairman Mark Walker. Titled Messaging in the Minority, the document offers messaging guidance on, quote, our pro-life platform. It's labeled strictly off the record and not to be printed or reproduced by or for media. The purpose of it, to give members, quote, clarity and conviction about the value of every single human life. It praises the Alabama law as, quote, bold, and attacks the media for using it to create gotcha moments. It describes allowing a rape victim to get an abortion as a, quote, second violent act. And it urges members to clarify that it isn't the woman who will be punished for having an abortion, but her doctor. A spokeswoman for the RSC declined to comment. Some RSC members we tried to speak with didn't really want to comment either.
I like Vice. I got a meeting I'm in a rush for.
Just had a question about this Alabama abortion ban. The RSC has talking points out about it. Quick question for you about the Alabama abortion ban for Vice.
I have to go, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just was wondering, there's like...
I'm sorry.
It's just one question about, have you seen the RSC has talking points about this right now?
And some of the other members of the RSC, including one from Alabama, didn't actually seem to agree with the talking points.
I would prefer to have an exception for rape and incest. I've said that over and over again. But I'm glad we have a law that we can take to the Supreme Court and get the Supreme Court to relook at Roe versus Wade.
And I'm very pro-life. I've always supported exceptions to these laws, but again, have not seen the RSC provision.
The top Republican in the House, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, isn't a member of the RSC, and he said he hadn't seen the memo.
My position happens to be the same as Ronald Reagan, the same as President Trump. I believe in the exemption. I'm pro-life. I think the most precious gift God gives us is life. That is what I've been voting on, and that's what I've been fighting for. I am also concerned about what I see on the other side. The idea that a child survives an abortion. What would the Democrats want to have happen? That child die, the infanticide of it.
McCarthy's attempt to change the subject to infanticide shows the Republicans' dilemma on this. He may know the Alabama law is extreme, but his colleagues want to champion it. And that makes Democrats' jobs a hell of a lot easier.
A 38-year-old man named John Walker Lind was released from prison today. Most Americans didn't even notice.
John, the father name. Open your...
It's a long way from the national furor that Lind provoked 17 years ago, when, in December of 2001, less than 3 months after 9/11, he was caught in Afghanistan fighting alongside the Taliban.
Was your goal to be shaheed or martyred?
It's the goal of every Muslim.
And brought back to the U.S. to face trial. He was the American Taliban, detainee 001 in the War on Terror, a traitor.
In the summer of 2001, John Walker Lind swore allegiance to jihad after being told that Osama bin Laden had sent some 50 people to carry out multiple suicide operations against the United States.
There was so much anger and confusion and emotion that hadn't really found a target after 9/11. It was just kind of free-floating, and it came down on the shoulders of this American who, as a teenager, had converted to Islam and in his late teens had gone over to Yemen and then Pakistan and then made his way to Afghanistan. It was a story that just captivated the American imagination and the emotion and the anger of what had happened and who had attacked us.
The government charged Lind with multiple crimes related to terrorism. It said he'd confessed to belonging to Al-Qaeda.
He needs to decide if he wants to live or die, and die here.
And that he'd taken part in a prison uprising during which a CIA agent named Johnny Mike Spann had been killed. But when the time came to put Lind on trial, the government's case started to look shaky. Lind had fought for the Taliban. He had met Osama bin Laden. But there was no real evidence that he'd been an Al-Qaeda member. As for his supposed confession, it had never been recorded. And there was another problem.
When he was first in U.S. custody, he was treated in an incredibly cruel way. Among other things, he was interrogated while he had a bullet still in his leg for days, and other cruel and abusive treatment. And so the question always became, if he said anything at all, was it credible, or was it something he said because of the pain he was being put in?
The government ended up dropping all of the terrorism-related charges in exchange for a guilty plea to 2 lesser ones. The judge sentenced Lind to 20 years.
What did they say? They say they were going to bring justice to those who had caused 9/11. And although John Walker Lind wasn't going to be accused of 9/11 and there was no talk of that, there was a question of trying to show the American people that they could get those who wished them harm. And in a way, you know, he became low-hanging fruit.
Striking a deal made sense for both sides, but it meant that what Lind actually did and thought remained a mystery. Lind never spoke publicly during his 17 years in prison. But a local NBC station in Los Angeles said yesterday that in 2015, he had corresponded with a producer there and expressed sympathy with ISIS. That raised the emotional temperature around his case again, but it didn't stop his release.
Here's a man who has not given up his proclamation of terror. And we have to let him out. Am I happy about it? Not even a little bit. The lawyers have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. If there was a way to break that, I would have broken it in 2 seconds.
Lind now has an Irish passport. He supposedly wants to move there when his probation is done.
"28 countries are taking to the polls over the next 4 days to pick who they want to represent them in the next term of the European Parliament, which votes on EU policy. In France, voters will have a new option on the ballot, the National Rally. The party's frontman is young, charismatic, and new on the scene.
Bonjour mes amis, merci de votre présence ici en Seine-et-Marne.
Jordan Bardella got into politics when he was 16, after growing up in a working-class suburb of Paris.
J'ai grandi dans des quartiers où aujourd'hui, la police n'entre plus, où aujourd'hui les médecins ne peuvent plus entrer, où aujourd'hui les pompiers sont caillassés lorsqu'ils rentrent. Qui en parle à part nous?
Bardella is a compelling new messenger with a compelling story. But his party isn't new. The National Rally is a rebrand of the far-right, anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant National Front. Run for decades by Jean-Marie Le Pen, and now his daughter Marine Le Pen, who's frequently at her protégé's side. Le Pen has put Bardella in the #1 slot on the National Rally's list for the European elections, meaning that he's certain to become a member of the European Parliament, one of the youngest ever. Why have you been chosen to be #1 on the list?
Parce que l'une des qualités du Rassemblement national a toujours été de donner une chance et une opportunité à la jeunesse. Et faire ce choix d'une tête de liste qui a 23 ans, je pense que c'est aussi un message d'espoir.
But Bardella hasn't been banking on hope alone. He's been campaigning hard, across the country.
Il faut expulser les personnes qui sont présentes de manière illégale sur notre sol.
J'ai le bras long.
Ouais, super, oui. Merci beaucoup, Jordan.
But as magnetic as Bardella is, it's clear that the party values him most as a shiny object to distract from the party's past. The National Front has previously had problems with Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia. What we've seen from your leader, Marine Le Pen, is an attempt to try and distance the party from that. Are you another part of this attempt to rebrand?
Le mouvement politique a son histoire. Maintenant, moi, je préfère me projeter sur 2030 plutôt que de penser à 1930 et plutôt que de penser à l'histoire du mouvement. Donc, quand je rejoins le Front National de Marine Le Pen en 2012, pour moi, le Front National, c'est Marine Le Pen. Et donc, cette rupture avec l'histoire du mouvement dans ce qu'elle peut avoir de négatif.
Out of 74 seats up for grabs, the National Rally are poised to win the most, slightly ahead of President Emmanuel Macron's centrist En Marche party. Once elected, Bardella and the National Rally candidates have said they'll form an alliance made up of at least 10 other populist parties across Europe, hoping for a bloc large enough to exert real pressure on the EU from the inside. For years, your party has argued for France to leave the European Union. What's changed?
Donc notre position a évolué parce qu'on est pragmatique et que le contexte européen a évolué.
In your manifesto, you state that you want to get rid of the European Commission, you want to scrap the Common Agricultural Policy, you want to renegotiate European treaties, you want to scrap the Schengen Agreement, which allows free movement within Europe, and you'd lower France's contributions to the EU. You don't want to work within the EU to change it. You want to scrap the EU, you want to destroy it from within.
Non, c'est l'Union européenne aujourd'hui qui est en train de détruire les peuples, qui est en train de détruire les nations. En réalité, il n'y a pas un peuple européen, il n'y a pas une nation européenne, il y a des peuples européens et des nations européennes. Et nous, notre modèle européen, c'est l'Europe à la carte, c'est basé sur des coopérations. Alors effectivement, on veut que chaque État retrouve ses prérogatives.
If you implement all the policies that you've got laid out in your manifesto, there would be no EU as it stands now. Why not just leave the EU?
Je pense que l'Union européenne n'est pas l'Europe. Je pense que l'Europe, c'est une civilisation, c'est une réalité géographique. Alors, plutôt que de tout casser du jour au lendemain, je préfère négocier, me mettre autour de la table et faire prévaloir mes intérêts.
L'immigration avec la question écologique est peut-être l'un des plus grands défis de ma génération, l'un des plus grands défis qui se posent à l'Europe au XXIe siècle. C'est une véritable bombe démographique qui est dégoupillée et qui risque de nous exploser au visage.
Immigration has been one of the biggest issues since the last European elections in 2014, a year before the so-called migrant crisis. And anti-immigration rhetoric, not always based in truth, has played a huge role in the rise of populism. Last year, a 17-year-old was killed. In the days after, you suggested that that was a migrant. That turned out not to be true. The National Rally held a campaign that suggested that migrants were getting paid more than people, French people who'd retired. Turned out that was not true. And then also at one of your rallies, you suggested that the European Union wanted to allow 6 million migrants to come into the EU. Again, that's not true. What your critics will argue is that what you're trying to do is win votes by instilling fear in people.
Ah oui, tout ça est faux parce que je ne l'ai jamais dit, effectivement. Ouais. Et vous savez, les gens, ils ont pas besoin d'entendre le Rassemblement national pour se faire un avis. Au-delà des leçons de morale des journalistes, les gens, ils ont ce qu'ils appellent le réel. Et tous les jours, ils voient effectivement dans leur quartier, ils voient effectivement ce sentiment de ne plus se sentir chez eux. Ils ont le sentiment effectivement de ne plus pouvoir laisser leurs enfants sortir tranquillement le soir et prendre les transports parce qu'ils savent qu'ils vont se faire agresser. Donc, honnêtement, personne n'agite les peurs.
You stumbled upon an opportunity.
Tomorrow, Disney releases the live-action remake of its 1992 animated classic, Aladdin. But 2 weeks ago, The Asylum, a small, low-budget studio, released its own feature film, Adventures of Aladdin. That's not a coincidence. That's The Asylum's business model.
Today, Marquand will be leading the Pledge of Allegiance, if we could all stand.
I guess the next clusterfuck is Aladdin.
You mean the most important film on our slate?
The Asylum is a film and television production and distribution company. Our films tend to be
we are being hunted by six-headed sharks.
Shitty, mostly. You know, not to be taken too seriously.
Let's go show them what it means to be a New Yorker.
A lot of people talk about wanting to watch quality cinema, but we find that most people, ourselves included, usually just want to come home from a hard day of work. You watch it, you have a good time, you never have to think about it again. The technical term in the entertainment industry is actually called a drafting title. I mean, if you go into your pharmacy, you'll see the brand name, decongestant, and you'll see the store's version, which looks exactly like it, but it just calls it decongestant. Well, that's a mockbuster. So if a movie is coming out about giant transforming robots, well, we make a movie about giant transforming robots that's called Transmorphers.
Shut it down. Shut it all down.
I think the audience understands that you're not buying the same thing. You're just buying a slightly shittier thing.
It's a trap. Repeat, it's a trap.
All right, let's start. Fade in. Somewhere in the Middle East, day, miles of sand dunes, camel caravans cross the desert. In the distance, palatial domes and minarets grow larger as we arrive at the outer city walls of Baghdad. I've worked on visual effects and major movies, but I've never directed a feature film before. I happened to notice on the schedule that they had Aladdin on the feature films upcoming, and it was obviously a mockbuster of the Disney Aladdin. And Tammy and I looked at each other and said, we should do that.
We wrote it over Christmas break in a week, and part of it we wrote in the car while we were driving up to my parents' house for Christmas.
Her Most Royal Highness Shahzadi is named Sultana.
He slams his fist onto the brass lamp depicted on the scroll.
If you will not come to me, then I must brave the cave.
The lawsuits are down to 1 or 2 a day at this point. But early in the days, we'd receive a lot of very angry letters.
This is the dress that she meets Aladdin in the garden in.
Okay.
You know, interestingly enough, I think the one studio that's never tried to sue us is Disney.
Bring me the lamp.
Although Disney has a reputation for being litigious, I think they probably don't want to embarrass themselves by suing little old Asylum. I like to think that some of the major studios would take it as a badge of honor that we've chosen to mockbust one of their films.
He made that crystal, and we have 3 of them in case we break it, because we will. Today was Gentlemen Start Your Engine Day. This was our first actual production meeting with all the department heads. We went on a location scout. Oh my God, this is real.
Okay, so let's look at the mine shaft to see if you can use it for anything.
Okay. We have 7 days to make this movie, and it's, you know, a feature-length film. So at the end of the day, if it's on time and in focus, it's going in the show. told. Crew's excited, actors are excited. We're about to pull the trigger on day one. Welcome to the Jackass Club.
All right, scene 21, here we go.
Aladdin comes running out with the lamp.
I'm not an adherent to the auteur theory that the director is an author of the film, because I think it's a collaborative medium and I think that everyone contributes to it. But one thing that I believe is true and is not going to make a lot of people happy is that asylum movies are really director-proof, because the concept is the star.
Action. That's it.
You know, if we have a really good director, yeah, the films are moderately better. But if we have a really bad director, they're not necessarily that worse.
Thank God.
No!
It's all going by so fast, and I'm just trying to keep up. You know, it's a lot of fun, but you gotta stay on top of every single little thing.
Reach. And win. I think if there's a good outcome for the movie, or a best outcome, that it hits and people say, yeah, Asylum made an Aladdin ripoff, yo, what a surprise. And then they say, but you know what? We watched it and it was kind of smart and kind of fun, and I hate to say it, I liked it better than the Disney one. That'll never happen, but that's my dream.
As you command, Master.
I think all in, it's probably be about 200, 250,000. To give you an example, the catering budgets on most studio films are probably more than the entire budget for Aladdin.
Earthquake.
The best outlook for Aladdin is that we'll get a television sale and that maybe we'll get in one of those red boxes. One thing that's very interesting about mockbusters is our mockbusters perform about as well as the studio counterparts perform on a much smaller scale. If a big studio film bombs, our mockbuster tends to bomb as well. And, you know, likewise, if it does well, ours does well. And so, you know, we're sort of like the canary in the coal mine, you know, for whether or not a studio film is going to be a success.
And cut. You want to do another one? Let's do another one.